Hello again, and welcome everybody to the latest Urban Manifesto webinar. I'm Lucy Bullivant, the founder of urbanista.org webzine for livable urbanism, and together with my colleague Prathima Manohar, the founder of the Urban Vision Think Do Tank, we've created Urban Manifesto, an exciting new series of weekly webinars. The pandemic and the massive demands of transitioning into a new era have provoked profound questions concerning the identities, policies, and processes of architecture, urban design, and planning. And they have accelerated what was already a huge need to change course on every front. With Urban Manifesto, we present the personal manifestos of our expert guests from across many different disciplines and backgrounds related to urbanism and city making, manifestos which are for healthier, happier, more livable, and that means more equitable and resilient urban futures. You can watch all the episodes that we've made to date on YouTube and Facebook if you look under the Urban Vision. We are tackling a myriad of themes ranging from co-housing to healthy buildings. Is density a boon or a bane? Making cities more mobile, and many others. And we've started also to build an exciting focus on specific plans, regeneration, and sustainable, moreover, plans for specific neighborhoods and cities globally, starting with Copenhagen. So today, Prathima is going to introduce today's theme and our guest in just a minute, but quickly, how it works each week is that our guests present their short manifestos of priorities for Urban Manifesto. And then we explore the themes, the issues and themes arising in a Q&A, and then we invite you, our audience members, to ask them questions. So in helping to meet the challenges brought about by the pandemic and to nurture a genuinely livable future, Urban Manifesto offers opportunities to learn, but also to unlearn old ways that have really lost their relevance or which are downright unhelpful in the 21st century. So support our urban reset roadmap for progressive, resilient, and responsible urban change. Over to you, Prathima.
Thank you, Lucy. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Urban Manifesto. Today's theme is how markets shape cities. And we are so delighted to welcome our guest speaker this evening, Alain Bertaud. And I'm sure a lot of you would have read some of his reports and his book as well. He's a senior researcher and scholar at New York University's Marron Institute for Urban Management. And he's the author of the book, Order Without Design, How Markets Shape Cities, which was published by MIT Press in 2018. He has worked extensively as the principal urban planner for the World Bank and as an independent consultant and as a resident urban planner in cities ranging from Bangkok to New York. And I have extensively followed his work in Indian cities, especially in Mumbai. So, Alain, it's so lovely to have you here for this conversation. How have you been during the last 6 or 7 months when our whole world has kind of turned upside down? Well, I know you're in New York.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me. Well, it was a little dull because I'm used to travel a lot, and being confined to my little suburb of New York with occasion trip to Manhattan was a little dull. So, but we are surviving it, and we hope that things will clear up one day. We don't know when.
Yeah, we all hope so too. And, we want to ask you to share your urban manifesto for our collective future. And I know you've prepared some slides for it, and I'm just going to bring it up for our audience.
So, this is I consider that cities are labor markets, and successful cities are cities where this labor market has been successful over a long period of time. My first slide here is I'm comparing the growth of the population of Manhattan and Paris municipality. So Manhattan and Paris municipality are not the entire city. They are only the core of the city. So we have here over a period, the Paris data start in the 17th century, 1600, and go to 2019. And this is the red line. And the blue line is the population of Manhattan. So what we see in the population of those two core cities is they are going through a lot of shocks, external shocks. Here, for instance, for Paris, we have the French Revolution. We have here those two lines represent the First World War and the Second World War, and then we have here the Great Depression. So you see that the population of those core cities have been influenced by this, and they have varied enormously. Both Paris and New York and Manhattan have lost sometime more than 1 million people, but they have survived. You see, this big change, this big shock, still make them survive. And how did they survive? So I will move to the next slide, maybe. They survive by next slide. Yes, they survive by adapting quickly their land use, and then if now that we are confronted with this pandemic, we do the same thing, I think those cities will survive extremely well, and maybe the outcome will be positive. It will accelerate probably change which were already coming, and I think it will solve some problem. Why am I so optimistic compared to many people are saying, well, cities are going to disappear, everybody going to disperse to live in villages and work remotely. I don't believe it is so. I think that some people will work remotely, but that happened already in the last 10 years or 15 years. I think that the face-to-face contact are absolutely necessary to maintain creativity and economic growth. You can work remotely for a certain time, but at a certain time you have to meet other people, because when you work remotely, everything is planned in advance, and we know that human progress is done by random contact and random ideas, which fertilize, between people and things like that. So this is why I am so optimistic about it. So what should we do? I think that we should. That will be my last slide. Sorry, I'm trying to. Yes. What should we do? We should not plan for the pandemic or for the post-pandemic. We should just listen very carefully to what people are doing. Cities are created by people, not by urban planner, not by the mayors or people like that. They are created by people and firms who are working together. So we should first listen very much to what people are doing. Are they moving in, out? What will require is to adapt the land use of cities to the new need of people, whether they need to meet in smaller offices or larger offices, whether they need to meet maybe in public space like a coffee shop or restaurant. They will have to decide. But what we have to do is to allow this land use to change, to reflect this new need. What I think, by the way, is that a number of people are going to leave the core of cities, and we see that in some area. We see the price of housing, for instance, going down in some area, and they will be replaced by other people. I don't think that the core city are going to be deserted. I think that we will have a swap of population. People who could not afford to live in cities suddenly will come in, and others will feel what they have seen enough of cities, will move out. So this movement, with completely grassroots driven, is, I think, very positive. And so that's why I'm very optimistic about the future of cities. We will go through a difficult adaptation phase, but in the same way as the Great Depression or the World Wars were difficult phase, eventually the city will survive and will emerge better from there. So this is my manifesto. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. That was a very hopeful message. And you are reminding us that cities have undergone shocks like this throughout their history, and the crucial component that have made them continue to survive and thrive is resilience and their ability to adapt. And thanks also for reminding us why cities make up 80% of the world's GDP. It's essentially because of people and the productivity of bringing people together, the innovation that is created by social interactions that cities allow. So thank you for reminding all of us about that and for that hopeful message. Alan, in your book, Order Without Design and How Markets Shape Cities, I've just put a link for on your book for our audience to look at, because I think it's a fascinating kind of look at how cities come up. Often nothing to do with what we planners think we are driving, but other forces. You've said that planners need to be better at tackling urban growth challenges and should approach city making by applying more theories from urban economists to practice urban planning. And you've said that the role of planners in developing and monitoring strategies must be improved to manage urban growth. And you've kind of said that to build better planned urban places, we have to create appropriate strategies and indicators. Now, isn't this approach to creating strategies with indicators, which is KPIs, much more commonly applied in planning than in the past? Talk to us a little bit about what you mean by how urban planners need to kind of engage with the idea of economics and markets to drive change. Give us tangible examples, because I think the planners in this room may not understand, what kind of toolkits they can use to enable the right growth strategy.
You see, we get back to the idea that cities are created by people, and people who are innovative and change things. Now, we need indicators to precisely know what those people are doing. And one way to know what they are doing is to look at, for instance, the number of dwelling units which are built every year in a city, where they are built, and how much they cost. How long is a trip to go to work from those new dwelling units? So these are my indicators. Now, those indicators in themselves do not tell you what to do. They just tell, I will compare it to a bit to taking the temperature of somebody who is kind of sick. A high temperature will mean there is something wrong. It doesn't tell you what to do. You still have to analyze and maybe have other indicators to know what is wrong and what should be done. What should be done is not to impose on people an optimum shape for a city. And that's what planners have a tendency to do. For instance, you hear always now, those days, planners saying we need compact cities. What? I am completely agnostic about that. I don't think, some city needs to be more compact. Some cities need to be less compact. It's the people who have to decide. It's not the planners who have to decide we need compact city. It doesn't mean anything. So what I mean by using, economists traditionally have no idea about the shape of cities, and that's one of their virtue. They just monitor what is happening, and they are trying to understand through the market what are the trends, what is happening. Now, the market, again, when I talk about market, the market is not a religion, it's not a god. The market is a mechanism. I compare it to, for instance, gravity. Gravity is with us all the time, and sometimes it's a good thing, gravity, sometimes it's a bad thing. If a balcony collapses from a building, it's because of gravity. But instead of blaming gravity for the collapse, you should say you should blame the design of the architect who did not understand the gravity. So this is my point in a way. I don't know if I summarize and answer completely your question, but this is, economists tell us about market, and market tell us about people. And by the way, market also reflects the priority of people. They reflect also, the culture of different people. That's why we have a different attitude to density, different cities.
Thanks, Alan. Lucy?
This is Alain. I found your book really fascinating. I work with local authorities quite a lot. I've worked in the private sector too. I live in a metropolitan city, London. I live in the very centre as well. So I think what I would observe is your observation in the book, that a city is mainly created from the bottom up and grows through the grassroots self-organization of markets and mechanisms. As you've emphasized just now, that is well understood, and that still very much applies, because your book was written 2 years ago. Then comes the pandemic this year, very tragically. And you say in your presentation just now that city managers should therefore abstain from trying to plan new post-COVID cities, but what they should focus their energies on is monitoring carefully all the changes occurring in order to adapt infrastructure to the new distribution of work, location, and densities. And by that, I guess you mean both transport and social infrastructure.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So how do you think that if we actually investigate the process to think about the mindset of these planners who are working in very, very tricky conditions at the moment, and looking forward to how they can make best impact, how can they intelligently collect and use the data, including on neighborhood real estate price? Everything is fluctuated so significantly, real estate prices, future housing affordability, changes in traffic, commuting patterns, even the addition, demolition of commercial and industrial space, in order to take positive action and facilitate these land use changes by simplifying zoning. You can give us some enlightening thoughts about this process, how best it's carried out.
I will give you an example, for instance, for New York.
Yeah.
New York City, we have a zoning category which is called commercial, and it's divided into several hundred subzones, which excludes some type. For instance, you can build a restaurant in one commercial zone, but you cannot have a hardware store, or you can have a pharmacy, but you cannot have a barber shop, because all this zoning category, in fact, has been established to slow down change and make change very expensive for some reason. planners sometimes have the feeling that they know where a barber shop should be and where it should not be. And I think this is wrong. They don't know anything about it. So what we have to do now, when we are confronted with a change in the organization of society, to allow society to reallocate. So the first thing is to reallocate land use, but basically allowing things to happen that we thought may not happen. For instance, this is already happening in the suburbs of American City. We see large shopping malls, which were very successful 20 years ago, deserted now. And the question is what to do with those malls. Well, there is demand for office building or even sometimes housing instead, in those malls. So what type of housing should be built there? Again, it's a demand for housing which should tell us. We should not say, oh, it should be individual houses or it should be high-rise apartments. We should say, well, who is interested in living there and what price they should pay for. They are willing to pay for it. So that's why we should have this flexibility. Many of our regulations now are really a straitjacket. I'm talking, by the way, about land use regulation and about type of use. I'm not talking about fire regulation or sanitation regulation. Here I don't think the market can judge what is good or what is bad. You need to. So I differentiate between the two. But say whether you should build studio apartment or 5-bedroom apartment, it should be left entirely to the market. No regulation should tell you that. So again, here I get back to New York City. You have in every block of New York City, you have a magic number, which in fact tells you what is the maximum number of apartments you can build on the block. And this is absurd because if you build, for instance, studios or say 1-bedroom apartment, you will go above this number. If you build 3 or 4-bedroom apartment, you will go, you will be within the regulation. So the regulation forces you to, and this regulation, by the way, was set about 40 years ago, based on, again, what planners thought was good. So I think this type of regulation are really bad, especially when the world is changing, because it prevents things from adjusting. I will see, right now, I will see that there will be a movement of younger people toward the center of city and older people like me moving out a bit. And I think that that will be a good thing, if this happens. But if we still have this regulation, for instance, about maximum number of dwelling units, per block, this will prevent this change from happening.
I completely agree with you. And I think that a lot of the regulations are unhelpful because they're actually just anachronistic, as you say. And younger populations, I've done research studies in European cities, they absolutely need that flexible mixed use done very intelligently. And we in London, we have to have a quantum of so-called strategic industrial land, but at the same time, it is absolutely paramount that in regenerating it, there is strong flexibility towards mixed use there, rather than limiting it so that it becomes like a barrier to genuinely livable mixed use development. So yeah, I completely take your point. Prathima.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alan. I think it was the mayor of Curitiba, Jaime Lerner, who once said that if you waited for all the plans and policies to be frozen, then it's a sure recipe for paralysis.
Yes.
And you've said in your book that most often the exercise of master plans is just a very costly PR exercise, and it often fails because of this obsession with central planning oriented philosophy, while things are changing pretty much on a daily basis because market forces are shifting, people's needs are changing. So, what's your view on this? Do you really see an emergence of a kind of flexible master planning approach where we can bring in the values that planners want of sustainability, inclusion, and well-being by using some other tools? How do you substitute what we've done for ages, which is master plans and policies? Is there examples that you can tell us about that, on how to do things differently?
Yes, you see, the idea of the master plan was that a city was like a big building. So every 10 years, you build a new plan, uh,
Mhm.
and then you have, so you take 2 years to build the plan, and then you have 10 years or 8 years to implement it the way an architect design a building, and then you have 1 or 2 years to implement your building. Now this is a completely false image. A city is not a building, and the idea that 10 years in advance you know what's going to happen and how many people will want houses and what will be the type of houses that they need, how much industrial land you need and where. This is, of course, absurd. What we need is to replace master plan by a, a monitoring every month or every 3 months of what is happening in the city, and then adjusting our infrastructure to what is happening. Now, uh, also the master plan, I think, origin came from the Industrial Revolution, where most industries were extremely polluting. So it is clear that you needed to, if you had a lead smelter somewhere, you didn't want to put a lead smelter next to a school or in the middle of a residential area. And during the Industrial Revolution, this did happen indeed. But right now, the few industries which are very heavily polluting usually are already far out in the countryside. They are not, nobody will build a lead smelter in the middle of London or New York. It will be far too expensive. Nobody will do that. So we have a lot of commercial area or office building or semi-industrial. When you have something like Silicon Valley is not really a traditional industry. It's something. There is no reason why those could not be mixed with other things. All you need is to have certain criteria about, say, noise and pollution. But to say industry has to be separated or barbershop has to be there and the hardware store to be there is completely absurd nowadays. And we have some example on that. I think the one where the most innovative on these things were in Taiwan, where in Taiwan they started having uh, the ground floor, 2 or 3 ground floor were commercial. Then you had even small workshop which were semi-industrial, and on top of it they built towers of apartments within the same block, and it worked very, very well. Sometimes they use even the flat roof above commercial area as a playground for schools. The schools were at the bottom of the residential tower, and then you had this. So this was an example of being very pragmatic about the new land use and how this land use adjust that way. By the way, you have that also in I'm very critical of Paris sometimes, but in Paris, Paris municipality, within Paris municipality, you can change office building into housing or housing into office building without asking for a zoning change. It's practically what you cannot do is to change the envelope of the building. You cannot have a taller building, but within the envelope of this, you can change land use. So this flexibility, and that's what, by the way, one of the main attraction of Paris is that you have restaurant, bookstore, cafe, or art gallery a bit everywhere. There is no zoning which tell you where to put them. So to answer better your question, what to replace master plan? It's a yearly exercise or even quarterly exercise where you monitor what is happening, and then you monitor also there are some people in the city who are working in the city have a completely legitimate job. For instance, I will think of a school teacher, and suddenly your indicators are telling you that a school teacher cannot afford a house in the city, although this school teacher has a completely not only a legitimate job but indispensable job. Nobody is more indispensable in the city than a school teacher. So suddenly you realize that a school teacher, if they have a school in the middle of Paris or London or New York, they will have to commute 2 hours, because beyond 2 hours, they will never find a house which is affordable or apartment affordable. So you have to do something about that. What is it? I don't know. This depends on the city. Each city will be different. It could be to improve transport so that they can find a house within half an hour of their school. It could be to remove, for instance, those absurd regulations you have to find in New York, where you are obliged to build 3-bedroom apartments everywhere instead of studios or 1-bedroom apartment. It could be that. It could be that you could have, building permit required 2 or 3 years. And if you can put it down to 6 months, it will lower the cost of housing enormously. So there's no silver bullet, by the way. There is not one thing which will solve everything. Usually in every city, you have to do about 20 things at the same time to solve one problem like affordability or transport. So that's why you need to have so much data collected continuously. You cannot rely on the data which was collected 10 years ago by the master plan. The other thing, my other beef against master plan is that usually they are done by consultants. So those consultants, I was one of them, by the way. So they're very competent, of course, but they don't know everything, and they have no skin in the game. They do their report. They usually like to flatter the city, pretend that there are no poor people, that things can be solved, a nice drawing, thing like that. And then they leave. And then the city managers are left with 5 volumes of report or 10 volumes. And they say, well, it's not really applicable here, And so this is really what is happening. This is my beef against master plan.
We have a comment by one of the audience members, Camila Chapela. She's from Tampa, Florida, and she says, "Thank you for bringing a brave voice. I don't agree with some of the perspectives, and you're forcing me to review my beliefs and perhaps grow as a planner. Thank you for being here." And I kind of agree with her, because I think urbanists are we've all been, we've got this kind of deep-rooted ideology on what planners do, which is delivering great quality of life and inclusion and equality for everyone in the city. And sometimes we don't pay attention to the market forces. Yes. And we hear you, Alan. What you're trying to tell us is pay attention to what people's needs are and respond to that quickly. And maybe master plans are not the way to deliver that. Something a little bit more dynamic, responding to changing needs is what we need.
Yes, and put yourself in the shoes of people. That, for instance, in my book, I criticize the master plan for Hanoi, which, by the way, was prepared by an international firm who get a prize for having put this master plan, which, by the way, is not implemented as many master plans either. Well, one of the good quality of master plan is that precisely they are not implemented. This is the only positive side they have. But so what happened in this master plan of Hanoi? The master planners decided that it was a good thing to keep a very large area cultivated between the center of Hanoi and the suburbs, and a very, very large area. And so they painted in their plan, they painted green a very large area where right now, you had the rice paddies. Now, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who has a little farm in the rice paddy, who with a motorcycle can get to the center of Hanoi in about 30 minutes. So if they keep cultivating their rice paddy, they have a relatively low income. It's a very hard work. But the income is not very high. And if they go to Hanoi with their motorcycle, they can get per hour probably about 10 times what they earn cultivating rice in their paddy. So do you think that the fact that you colored this area, the paddy green, is going to keep this paddy green? Or and is going to, you still have workers who are going to work in the paddy when they can earn much more working in the city as a carpenter or as a mason or even as a school teacher? No, of course not. So this is the way you should address things. Why people live in slums, and you have to put yourself in the place of the people living in slums, and you see that what they do is completely rational under the rule of the game that you have imposed. So you have to change the rule of the game if you want the slum dweller to improve his situation or her situation.
Yeah. I want to quickly say that, in two of the cities that I've worked most in, which is in Bangalore, we did have a master plan. It's still not been implemented. In Mumbai, we've actually had a master plan, which has expired. The new DP is not even, the new development plan is so controversial that it keeps changing. So we are living at a time with no plans, and it really has put a lot of stress on what the future direction of the city is. So maybe we need to engage with new tools to figure out the future of that city.
So there is another aspect, and Mumbai is a good example of that, is that not only you need to monitor what is happening and adapting regulation to what is happening to respond to the difficulties of people living there, but you have also to provide infrastructure. In very large cities like Mumbai, you have to provide infrastructure, and infrastructure is not provided by markets. You could have a private company build a sewer system or build a transport system or even run a transport system. But basically the design of this has to be top down. But it has to be top down by trying to serve the people where they are and the way they are, not to serve an ideal city which still do not exist, or exist only in the mind of the planner. One example for that, for Mumbai, I don't know if you have seen the plan provided by, I'm not sure if I should name, but a consulting firm from Singapore. Now, Singapore is a very well-run city. I respect Singapore very much. But the planners there who did a plan for Mumbai, first, in the entire plan, and there were several volumes, not once did they mention the price of land. Not once did they mention what people were paying for rent in slums. Not once. Not once did they mention how long it takes for somebody living, say, in the north of Mumbai to go to work. Not once. But they say we can develop a little island to in the bay. We can do this. We can do landfill, and they show a design which was purely hypothetical. There was not one price there, one cost. It didn't address at all. So it showed an image of a wonderful city where it looks a bit like the Club Med. Everybody was going by ship, by little boats going here and there. You had the sailboat in the middle of the bay. It was wonderful, but it's like advocating a flying carpet, in order to solve transport problem in London or in Mumbai. I mean, it's flying carpet is a wonderful thing, except that it doesn't exist. And many of those master plans do not exist. It exists, but they are still attractive because for politicians, they say, you see, this is the way the city, vote for me, and this is the city. It will be, 10 years from now. But it's an illusion. It's opiate of the people. Master plan is opiate of the people.
Lucy?
Well, I speak as somebody who is currently writing the second edition of my book, Master Planning Futures. It was published 8 years ago by Routledge. And it is precisely about this theme of the increasing adaptability of the actual work of master planning, working in close conjunction with all the other planning tools that can be produced in an innovative way. So, and I think so long as the master plan itself is not allowed to run riot, I mean, I do agree with you that master plans are very often, fortunately, fail because they're so bad, and they're very much about the worst form of social engineering.
Yes,
but
yes.
the illustrative master plan that perhaps is very much about the aesthetics of the skyline, the buildings, the tall buildings on a skyline and so on, and certain aspects of density, the amount of green space, making sure green space is there. But that is not by any means the whole picture, and it has to go hand in hand with very intelligent frameworks and sets of principles that are about, protecting historic assets, reinventing historic buildings, the fabrics and so on. All these needs and how to intelligently house people, all of these needs are actually, they're best expressed in framework tools as part of an overall family. And if you only have a master plan, then you're reverting to the old model. So I completely take your point. I have found some very good master plans, and I say for financial reasons, some of the better ones, what they have in common is they're only done very much phase by phase. So plot by plot, phase by phase, where you can, the planners have to absolutely consider the indicators very, very carefully and take a very strongly empirical approach. Because if they don't, there will be huge repercussions. So it leads on to my next question, which is how do you evaluate urban planning regulations? And to go back to say your example of Paris, are they always in some kind of trade-off? So, for example, financially viable when they oppose markets, but also at a manageable cost, and then also okay because trade-off is explained clearly by the planners to the people. I mean, the evaluation process not so straightforward, but at the same time, is it not clear what the criteria are for which regulations are good and which ones are not?
Paris is a very special case because basically I'm taking just the municipality of Paris, right? That's been 2.5 million people out of about 11 million now, Paris metropolitan area. So metropolitan Paris, municipality of Paris. The plan itself is basically historical preservation. Everything is about historical preservation, preserving perspective and things like that. Now, the regulation there, interestingly enough, are absolutely efficient to preserve this. If the objective is to preserve Paris the way it was at the time of the Impressionists, the regulations are completely correct. They do exactly that. So in a certain way, if we are in a democracy, and I believe Paris is still a democracy, if the people think that Paris should be different, maybe looking a little more like London, with a new building a bit everywhere, new CBD, then they should vote their mayor out and ask for a plan which do that. But they don't do it. Apparently the keeping Paris the way it is, the way I'm talking about the Impressionists, but basically it was when at the time where France was still a great power, is very, very attractive to Frenchmen, and this is a value, but it has a cost. The cost is, of course, gentrification, absolute gentrification. The amount of subsidy that the central government put in Paris is enormous. Maintaining all this historical building, putting gold on the bridges, across the Seine, is cost a lot. the fact also that you don't allow tall building in Paris means that what is there is very expensive, and at the same time you maintain a quality of life because of the subsidy you get because it's Paris. That, but again, if you make those transparent, they the result of this policy, again, very successful in maintaining historical Paris and keeping the city extremely attractive, I would say. I mean, maybe I'm biased, but I find it very attractive. The prices you have a very elaborate transport system inside Paris. Most of middle and lower middle income people are pushed in the periphery outside the transport system. The only transport from if you work and live in the suburb, your trip is going to be from suburb to suburb. It's not going to be from the Étoile or the Champs-Élysées to the Latin Quarter. It's going. So you are not going to have any transit solution for that. You are going to have to use your car, and so you have this enormous contrast of a very elaborate transit system and relatively efficient within Paris, subsidized, but serving the richest people practically in the metropolitan area, and you have the poorest people in the periphery who have to pay. We have an old Renault who consume a lot of gas, and of course it pollutes a lot, and it creates global warming. So the government is telling you, well, we are going to increase the price of gas, and you have then this Gilets jaunes movement, which is not very constructive, unfortunately, but you understand why they are angry in a certain way, because again, nobody puts themselves in their shoes, so again, you see, you have to look at all these things, but I agree, and when a regulation does exactly what it says it does, I have nothing against it if we are in a democratic society, because then people say, well, I don't agree. Let's say you could imagine that Parisian will say, well, they say that at a certain time for the 15 arrondissement, that they allow a little more height in the 15 arrondissement, but most others are kept, very low. That means housing is always going to be extremely expensive in Paris, and that means you exclude the young, and you exclude the middle class and the poor.
So, which cities in the world have you worked in where they have they have really not explained the regulations at all clearly to the public?
I think New York. New York, there is an assumption that. Let's say in New York, basically, the planners realize that in general, the people who live there, who are living there now, they don't like change. So they have made a zoning under the pretext of environmental protection or neighborhood character protection, which prevents any change or makes change extremely expensive and long and difficult. So by doing that, of course, the people who live there and are owning, by the way, an apartment or, are very happy. The one who are renting are not so happy. And the young who have not had will never have a chance to buy an apartment in New York ever. But they don't realize that, because most of the zoning is not done in the name of historic, something clear like historical preservation of this or that. They say is to preserve the character of the neighborhood. Now, if Manhattan character has to be preserved since the 17th century, you will have only townhouses. You will never have the one skyscraper in Manhattan. So at a certain time, you had to release things. I'm all for, for instance, preserving historical thing, but you have again to show the trade-off. If you decide that Manhattan and some part of Brooklyn is an enormous historical monument, that means no change are possible. You are doing, by definition, an enormous gentrification. You are pushing the poor and the middle class outside of the city. So if this is your goal, fine, but put it in writing, saying, well, this is the price to pay.
Excellent. Prathima?
Alan, I want to kind of draw this discussion to the fact that we are now in an era of speculative urbanism. Our global cities like New York and London have become places where oligarchs of the world invest their capital into and skew the urban economic models. So you have probably more people owning real estate from outside, who are not Londoners, but maybe from Russia or Middle East or Asia than Londoners itself. And in emerging world cities like in Mumbai, for example, we have empty buildings that are standing across the city, owned by speculative investors. We have stalled infrastructure alongside that empty buildings, and most often you're now seeing large parts of our land being owned by private equity funds. So that whole aspect of the real economy vanishes in this context somehow. So in this context, how can city leaders and governments creatively draw upon market to better run and manage their cities? And can you tell us if market-oriented city is different from what you are referring to as like using economics for managing urban growth? Are they linked? Can, for example, a market-oriented city deliver the inclusive city agenda? How can we make those kind of social goals happen while we draw upon the markets?
So let us start with speculators and speculation. I will draw two types of speculators. The one who are coming from outside, but who are not. And I will link that. One of the first example I saw of that of this was in Switzerland many years ago. That there were people from different countries buying a piece of land in the countryside in Switzerland, because owning a piece of land in Switzerland allow them not to have citizenship, but to have a right to come here. And so the price of land in Switzerland, because of this very stable regime, and also maybe bank secrecy at the time, it gave a value to the land in Switzerland, which has nothing to do with the rent you could get from this land. If the people who build a piece of land in a village in Switzerland, it was not because it reflected the price of milk of a cow which will be on this land. It was only because there were so many rich people around the world who wanted a foothold in Switzerland, because one day it might be very convenient for them. So what did the Swiss government do confronted with that? And that's many years ago. They put a red line to eliminate this type of speculator. They put a red line and they along certain area and say they were allowed to those speculators were allowed to build, no, let's say, sorry, to buy, a flat in Zurich or in Geneva, but they were not allowed. There was a red line around those rural areas. They were not allowed to buy anything there, any property there, and the Swiss were allowed to and then build, but it was assumed that this. So this is one type of speculator. By the way, I don't think that in Mumbai you have so much speculator like that. You have this other type of speculator who say, well, if I have to invest money in India, the stock market is fluctuating. There are a lot of tax on that. The best way to invest my money is to buy land or to buy a flat, because it's only thing which will resist inflation, which will go at inflation. And that's, so here we are running into a problem of, I would say, macroeconomics. In India, like in a number of countries, well, in a certain way, it's a bit the same in France. The government keep the interest very low when people are saving money, for instance. So if you have some saving, you are a middle class person in India, you have some saving, and you want to invest it, and you don't want this saving to disappear because of inflation or the devaluation of the rupee, the best thing for you is to buy a piece of land or a flat, whether you want to live in it or not. And of course, the way to counter that is to look at the macroeconomic thing, that there should be other way to invest in India, like maybe the stock market should be regulated differently so it's more transparent, so people have some confidence in it. Or at the same time, you should have also property tax, which mean that if buying a flat in itself is not a bad thing. Keeping a flat empty is a bad thing, certainly. And if you keep a flat empty, it's because you don't pay property tax as a proportion of the value of your assets. So there are a number of things. The other aspect, I think, in many countries, including London, by the way, or in Paris, of speculators. And by the way, we are all speculators in a certain way. That means if we know that if we buy something, and 20 years from now, it will have much more value, well, we'd rather buy this thing rather than, buying something else. So there is nothing wrong with that. What is wrong is that, again, those regulations, and I'm thinking of London in particular with this green belt, the regulation which prevents the city from developing. So you know that the planners are going to keep the supply of housing or floor space very low in London because of regulation, because it will take so long to get a permit. And if you know that the supply is restricted in the long run, but there will be always people wanting to live in London, obviously, a lot of people, not only, again, British people, but all over the world, people want to live in London or to work in London. It's very attractive. So if you restrain the supply, but you always have a high demand, the prices are going to go up all the time. That's what I mean by learning about economics. This is basic economics. So unless you remove the supply, and this is not one of my invention. I refer here to, in the case of London, to Kate Barker. Dame Kate Barker was asked. She's a very prominent macroeconomist. Actually, she's not an urban economist, but she was asked several times to look at London and why the prices are so high, because it has also this high price in London are not good for the economy of the UK. And so she looked at it and she says, I am absolutely amazed that when those regulations are established, there is no reference to prices at all. Nobody take into account price signals. Nobody take, people consider that the green belt is something which is providing a lot of benefit, but nobody look at those benefits, whether they are real or not. They don't look at the costs. And so you see that this is where we have to learn from economists. That those price signals has to be taken seriously. When they are speculators, it's because there is a constraint on supply, and you have to remove this constraint on supply, either by removing regulation or improving transport.
All right, thanks, Alan. Lucy?
Yeah, so let's stay on this topic of the urban economists, because a really key thread in your book is this whole issue of your really strong argument, the case that you make for a close alignment between the city planning and the city economics departments.
Yes.
So how can on a practical level urban economists become more included in the day-to-day operations of running cities, and what are the specific, if you could spell out the advantages of having a close alignment in the first place?
Well, first, I think the city has to hire economists and working in the city planning department. Not only an economist to look at the macro structure of cities, but it should be a microeconomist, by the way, and it should be staff. That goes back also to my idea about master plan. Master plan are bad because they are prepared by somebody who is outside. It's not somebody who is in the trenches. So you should have economists in the trenches. Right now, economists contribute, if you want, to the knowledge about cities because, academic economists constantly write about zoning, about rent control, about public housing. You have hundreds of papers, or even about transport. There are a lot of study by economists about the light rail, for instance, metro, about pricing congestion, things like that. The problem is that those economists are working outside the city. They are not there at the time decisions are taken for some reason. And I think that, so if they write a paper about, say, congestion pricing in London, 5 years after this has been implemented and they criticize it, everybody say, this is interesting. But, to change something which has been done is very difficult. It would have been better to do it better at the beginning, or at least to have somebody who will say, let us try that. Let us monitor this. And if it is not the result we think it will be, then we will modify it. So you need somebody inside. Now, how to do that? I don't know. How to convince a mayor to include in his payroll in the city planning department urban economists. I don't know how to do that politically. I hope it will be done one day. And I think it's very different from, again, when you have already a situation and you ask an outside economist, usually an academic or from a think tank, to look at it. That's why, for instance, Kate Barker reports, which are excellent, they are absolutely so readable, so clear, so well documented, had no impact at all on the city of London, and because she was an outsider.
Yeah, and we have here in the UK, we have Mariana Mazzucato, we have Kate Raworth, both of them incredible economists, and they both function within academia, but then they apply that's their day job, and they apply their tactics and strategies, extremely advanced ones, I have to say, very compelling. To the challenges of cities. But yeah, I think you're totally right. It has to be a direct appointment by the municipalities and the local governments themselves. Yeah. So Prathima, I know time is hastening on. So
I think we are already over time, but I'm going to ask one last question. And I want to, say hello to our audience as well. And if you have any questions, please share it below in the video link, and if we'll try to get Alan to respond to some of them. My question to you, Alan, is that, The Economist wrote recently in an op-ed that this pandemic almost seems like a preview to the climate change emergency. And, that is the big kind of crisis that is facing all of us. And we all have to recognize that climate change resilience is crucial for our collective future. And, what are there economically viable and effective tools for developing such eco-friendly, climate resilient cities? How can we create policies to unleash the market to respond to this type of a crisis, which requires pretty scaled large scale kind of intervention?
I think here I will just repeat what most economists have said, that there is no substitute then for pricing carbon. You have to price carbon. And we have to get it maybe at first at the European scale. How do we convince everybody to price carbon? I'm not so sure. But unless you put a price on carbon, that means that every time you emit carbon, you know through the price what is the cost of this. We will never achieve it. One of the problem I have, by the way, with traditional approach to global warming is that everybody is giving target of reduction of carbon emission, which is fine. Every country say, well, we'll reduce carbon by 50% by this year. What they don't do is tell us how much energy they will consume in order to maintain their economy. Do not forget that our economy depends on a number of megawatt hour consumed every day. Mm-hmm. And it is clear that if those megawatt hour were priced a bit differently, we will probably achieve the same welfare and consuming less. That's certainly the case. But how much less? Unless we match our consumption of energy with global warming, and saying, well, I think we will never invent the right thing. This is, for instance, for me, I could understand the argument of ecologists against new nuclear plants, but I do not understand why nuclear plants, which have been already built, therefore their carbon price has been already integrated. Let's say integrated. Has been, the carbon has already emitted, and now they don't emit much. Why would they close them? Why don't you wait for, the renewable energy to come up and replace those rather than do the opposite? This is why you have so much reluctance from people to go green, because they need a certain amount of energy to survive. And then I am thinking of countries like India or China, who still have a number of poor people, and we will need more energy. So unless we put together this energy need, and if we put together the energy need and the technology, then we will have an incentive to invent new technology which will solve this problem. You cannot, if not, I think we are going into a dead end. And right now I see all the countries which are saying, oh, we have this goal. They are not meeting those goals because they are not matching it with, they are only talking about investment in green. They have to say replacement of, this number of megawatt or even megawatt hour of energy or electricity, and in order to reach this goal of carbon, you have to link carbon to electricity, to megawatt, to energy, not just have a goal, abstract goal saying France is going to reduce its carbon emission by 20% or 30%, or be carbon free in that. This means nothing in itself. Again, it's a bit like a master plan. You see that I mean the master plan. We have to calculate first how much energy we need to maintain our standard of living. How much we need, and then how fast we can replace this dirty energy into clean energy. But the constraint is really to maintain our standard of living, and for the poor to improve their standard of living. You cannot tell people in Africa, you are going to stay that way for another 50 years because because of global warming. They will not accept it. So we
Yeah.
have, and I think that will stimulate more research into clean energy, including, by the way, batteries, transport of energy. There are a lot of areas. If the goal is only reduction of, and also what's bad if it's only investment of government, they are necessarily investing in things which already exist rather than in research. Research is long term, and that in a way distract from the real problem. But
You're right.
I think it's very real, and in a way, it's much more, I think, potentially damaging than the COVID. That I think we will adjust to the COVID very well. In the long run, I see it even as positive. I don't see global warming as positive. Really, frankly, for a long time.
Speaking of COVID, I think there's been consensus and a lot of scientists already saying that we are kind of in an era of pandemics because of biodiversity loss.
Yes.
And this year, governments across the world have had to spend trillions of dollars to manage this crisis.
Yes.
Because we did not pay attention to it. And I hope that economic number will at least push the governments to deal with the other big crisis that we're all going, the bigger crisis that's facing us, which is climate change.
Yes.
Alan, this was such a fascinating and rich conversation. We really, really enjoyed it, and we can't wait to come and meet with you and ask you more questions. And this has been really a very important and insightful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me and giving a chance to express those sometimes difficult ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Alain. It was truly thought-provoking, and I've read your book. It's one of those books where you can skim read it, then you go back, you read some of the practice. It's packed full of very practical advice for planners as well. So I think it should have a long shelf life.
Thank you.
A longer one than my book had a long shelf life, but then it's completely up for reinvention now.
Yes.
But hey, that's just what the lot of the author.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Exactly. So thank you so much. It was really, really absorbing. So just a quick announcement: on the Tuesday 20th of October, we have a session on sustainable development with Jonathan Smales, who's the executive chairman of a development strategy business investor and master developer company called Human Plus Nature. So let's see what that reveals for us all. So thank you very much once again. Thanks, Prathima, and thank you everybody for tuning in. And tune in again very soon. We will hopefully have a session next week as well. We will announce it on our social media pages when we've confirmed it. Okay.
Thank